Hi there. You're listening to the Everglade Chronicles, a reading. I'm Garrett Shave, the author. Welcome back to the podcast. Today I will be reading Chapter 1, Down the Rabbit Hole. What has Theodore Walker gotten himself into? Let's find out. I had chosen a quiet Tuesday to visit the meadow once more. Cousin Jessica had been from Sunset Town, the same place that Nova claimed to be from. I was entirely curious to explore the meadow, to see things that she had once seen. Before I left the house, I stared at myself in the mirror. My hair was dark brown, almost black, like Jessica's. My eyes, however, were a startling blue. My frame was average and I had a small tummy, but that didn't matter much to me. Adjusting my black glasses, I nodded. It was time to find some answers and begin my life in the meadow. I followed a long trail lined with birches towards the first large bridge. There was hardly a soul around, except for a man walking his retriever across the wide expanse. It was still rather chilly, and I shivered in my navy blue spring jacket. Sunset Town was to the west of the bridge, and I could see some of the trees from my vantage point. Taking a deep breath, I crossed the wide stretch and headed west. The path was cleared of some snow, but footprints lathered the ground. Underneath it all was gravel, unlike the asphalt that lined the main path. As I walked along the winding path that led me around the island, I noticed a tall girl looking at the ice on the water. She had long brown hair and her hands on her hips in a most observant pose. "Excuse me," I asked timidly. "Does the word Sunset Town mean anything to you?" The girl turned around, her eyes wide with surprise. "Yes," she said. "You are within that place." "Sorry to intrude. If you were busy," I stammered. "I met a girl here the other day, a girl named Nova. She told me about the Kingdom game and I was hoping to join." "We could sure use some more help, that is for sure," the girl said. "My name is Madison, and I am the Duchess, although my power these days seems to be quite restricted." "Why is that?" I asked. "You sure look familiar," Madison said suddenly, studying me. "Come with me and I shall tell you." We strolled along the gravel path and into a small grove of trees. While the deciduous trees lacked leaves, the pines were tall and robust. In the grove was an insignificant white patio chair, cracked from excessive use. The Duchess sat herself down and sighed. I realized that this was her throne. "This is what remains of my court, you see," she said somberly. "The Everglade meadow has changed dramatically since the time of Queen Isis." "Oh," I said, gasping loudly. "I am glad you made mention of her. I am Theodore Walker." Madison's brown eyes grew large again, and she smiled. "Yes, I knew you looked familiar. Are you a younger brother, or perhaps a cousin?" "I am her cousin. Our fathers are brothers," I said proudly. "Will this help me in the game?" "It might, yes," she replied. "We must go and see the chief administrator. He is a powerful boy and can sometimes be persuaded." "I am not to see the emperor?" I asked. "Am I not guaranteed at least a princely title?" Madison laughed briefly. "You have much to learn, young Theodore." "Just call me Theo," I smiled. "Fine, I shall call you Theo," she answered. "You will likely not receive a princely title, for the emperor is insane. He is powerful, all-powerful. His own strength and influence are unmatched, and he likes it that way. There are no princes here. I suppose I should tell you the story." "Please do. I am very curious." Madison settled into her chair comfortably and began the long tale. Under Queen Isis and her king, Ben, the kingdom had entered a golden age of prosperity. There was endless harmony, great fortune, and happiness. It was only when the golden ones began to leave that things changed. The first to go was Mark, who was the Duke of the Lost Forest at the time. Their affairs are a different story. He had trained his wonderful protege to take over, but the duchy couldn't last. Then the others left. Finally, Queen Isis herself left. Such was the end of a great era, for her replacement was rather lackluster. When did things begin to get really bad? Madison sighed. "I am very close to that part, young Theo. Her heir was a young lad named Luke Price. Many contested that his common birth was improper, but Isis herself saw much in Luke. You see, Luke was one of us once. He labored in the fields, and he flew high with the new aristocracy. There was simply one problem. Luke was weak. Not physically, but mentally. He was unable to stop the hordes of invaders when they came. Invaders? Yes, and tons of them. Now a boy named Tyler Crest and our good friend Matthew were joint lord commanders of the armed forces at the time, and even their cunning did not prevail. The Queen's sister Abby had left them suitable forces, but they were not suitable enough, it would have seemed. This unknown assailant had figured out how to get in and knew all the ins and out of the kingdom. He was unstoppable. Not even the Lady Spymaster knew what he was up to, and that's saying something. Anyway, Price fell to the command of this new boy, who called himself the Dragon Emperor. Dragon Emperor? How curious, I thought aloud. Madison nodded. The Dragon Emperor preferred to wear samurai armor instead of the Roman cuirass plastic stuff the soldiers around here normally wore. It was like an entirely new era had begun. His suit was from the dollar store, no less, but it was most regal. He wore a red veil, and all you could see were his piercing eyes. Such a skilled fighter, he battled with 2 plastic katana. It was rumored that the Emperor and his cohorts were trained in martial arts, something called the Dragon Arts. What happened to Luke? Luke and much of the remaining Old Order were executed. Now, this is a bad thing, but it is not permanent. In our little game, once you die, you are given a restart. All your titles, lands, possessions, and so on are forfeited. They no longer exist, and you must start over. However, Luke and many of the others felt such disgrace that they left the meadow forever. They knew that this new regime would not accept them. So, this emperor that Nova has been telling me about is the dragon who rules now? Yes, she said simply. One and the same. Things around here have never been the same. The Dragon Emperor, whose real name is unknown to us, is unparalleled by anyone. He is basically a god, and we must obey his rules. I nodded. These strange events were interesting to me. The idea that a godly boy could emerge and seize control with such carnage was fascinating. Now, Madison rubbed her hands together, allow me to continue. The Dragon Emperor established his realm rather quickly, as if he had had experience before. The royal city is still the main base of power and government, but now the Emperor resides at Emperor's Perch, high on the hill. Sunset is the only duchy to remain intact. The rest have fallen. The entire landscape of aristocracy was reworked. What about the Lost Forest? I asked, intrigued. Allow me to explain, she said with a smirk. The Lost Forest has always been a separatist haven, even back to the time of the legendary Gabrielle Sinclair. They have talked about leaving the kingdom. Once the Dragon Emperor came, that's exactly what they did. The forest children are strong and easily defended their own lands against the Emperor, and now there exists a fragile truce. They would never agree with having the Emperor as their sovereign, especially after he decimated the former Everglade Kingdom. Who rules the roost out there now? A powerful separatist union evolved once Luke was dethroned, and now the principality is valuable. The elegant Princess Violet is the apple of the Emperor's eye. He is quite fond of her. The head of state there is Mark Glass himself, who returned when the forest needed him the most. He rules under the name Oberon now. Shakespeare, I beamed. How awesome. Madison nodded. I think that pretty much sums it up, actually. The Emperor's court is filled with interesting kids. Most of them are vipers. There are hardly any revolts, for the Emperor's will is divine. He tends to make prime examples out of traitors. How many of the Old Order remain, with you included? I asked. Now that Mark is back, there is only one other person, the rogue Lady Spymaster. Before Sassy Cassie left, she entrusted her operations to Cora Hastings, a friend of your cousin. Cora remains with 1 foot in our world and 1 foot in the real world. She still likes to call herself Lady Spymaster. I am assuming she lives in exile? Madison nodded and rose from her chair. That she does. She lives in the Lost Forest, which is now called Gaia. Mark Glass and Princess Violet were instrumental in its creation. Violet herself was the leader of the Separatist Union. I nodded. This was getting so intriguing. Certainly, I thought, I wish to be part of this intrigue. You simply must tell me about your old friends, I remarked. I am trying to follow the stories, but I don't know who anyone is. Madison giggled. Yes, I suppose I should give you a little backstory. All of these names must be confusing. She rubbed her chin. Allow me to begin at, well, the beginning. Your cousin Queen Isis won the throne in a battle known to history, forever remembered by those around us. As time continues, the children forget the greatness of the past. The monarch before her, Venus, was a cruel snake. She was like if the Queen of Hearts and bloody Queen Mary had a baby. Do you follow? She was quite tyrannical and unjust, and it took your cousin to rise up and unite all of us against her. The first Lady Spymaster was Cassidy Graham, but we all called her Sassy Cassie because she was a master rebel and gave authority a sassy fight. She had a spy organization, kind of like the CIA. She managed to recruit your cousin and a few choice others so they could overthrow Venus. When she left the meadow, she entrusted her agency to Cora Hastings. Cora had once been the attendant of a spoiled noblewoman named Lady Chloe Mountbatten. Cora was brilliant, a true actress. She was the inside source, a traitor to the crown, but on the inside because she was a lady-in-waiting. I should also touch on the legends of the Lost Forest, Gabrielle Sinclair and her trusty heir, Mark Glass. Despite being gone for so long, Gabrielle is remembered as a goddess. She was the greatest Duchess of the Lost Forest in living memory, and her own memory was tattered when Venus came to the throne. Rumor has it they were friends once. Venus dethroned Mark, and that particular event was what really spurred Jessica and the others into action. Mark struggled and eventually became the Duke. Mark is a mystical guy, really debonair but intriguing too. Do you know Ben? You simply must know him if you have ever been around your cousin. Benjamin Morrison was once the mayor of Sunset Town before allying with Jessica. He then became the king and also the Duke of Sunset. He made me the Duchess when he left. Those who knew him to be cowardly, but he rose to the occasion. The rest, well, I don't really need to mention those people. They are rather insignificant. You forgot to mention Luke Price, I smiled. Yes, I suppose I did, Madison laughed. He is rather forgetful when you think about it. Luke was king after Isis, and many figured her decision was a bit premature and foolish. I love your cousin and all, but Luke was not the best choice. He was immature and could not handle the invasion. I think the Dragon Emperor timed himself quite perfectly to take over, since Luke was facing turmoil from within his own court. It caught most of us by surprise, but none so much as Luke Price. I recall the day he was executed. It was almost poetic, for the Dragon Emperor anyway. There was a large crowd, and we were near the water. The backdrop to the scaffold was an array of tall cattails and watery brush. As highest-ranking noblewoman there, I had front-row seats. How horrible, right? I was almost made to watch my sovereign die. I try not to remember that day, but it was gruesome. As I have mentioned before, Luke was too embarrassed to restart and left the game with most of his friends. That was the day the sun set in Everglade. What a disheartening tale, I remarked, quite saddened and moved. I should still like to play. Thank you for telling me your stories. Many believe me to be a storyteller, some sort of oracle or sage. I have a lot of stories, and a lot of memories of the past. Kind like you must be dangerous to the institution, I observed. Madison nodded. Yes, that we are. I am always careful of who I speak with about this stuff. The Dragon Emperor would have my head for spreading such treason and heresy. I nodded. Shall we get started? We must go see Lord Isaac, she said to me, motioning me to follow. He is the chief administrator. He prefers to be called a lord. He is a pompous fool, but he is the welcoming committee and will get you set up as much as he sees fit. What if he gives me a low position? I asked as we walked. Certainly I cannot have that. She sighed and laughed briefly. If he gives you a peasant position, we can petition him to the Lord of the Royal City. That is his boss. In this way, we can ensure that you are given proper treatment. I smiled as we walked the gravel path. Will he even be around? It is a Tuesday, and it's still March. The Emperor is always here, it would seem. Many of his court are bound to be here as well. We found ourselves trekking through the royal city. The place was abandoned, save a few adults walking past. Much of the playground equipment was covered with snow and ice, including the large, foreboding jungle gym. That is the ministry, she pointed out, watching my gaze. That has always been the headquarters for the armed forces. There is also a jail there. I nodded as we navigated towards the far end of an icy swing set. Beside it was a newly built rock-climbing wall, smack dab in the middle of the playground. Adjacent to that was a new metal slide with a small room underneath. "Lord Isaac," the Duchess called tediously, "we require you." A boy emerged from the small room wearing a russet red bathrobe made of fleece. It swallowed his figure, but the regal robe sure made him look more important. In one hand he carried a curtain rod with an ornamental glass finial orb on the end made to look like the sun. It reminded me of an ornament you might find in a summery garden. The boy was about the same height as me, but his figure was impossible to tell due to the overflowing robe. His face was pudgy and round. His eyes were blue, like mine, and his hair was short-cut blonde and shaggy. He wore a look of boredom as he studied me. "Your Grace," he bowed gently, "what might I do for you?" "I have a new arrival," Madison gestured. "His name is Theodore Walker." Lord Isaac shrunk back at the sound of the surname, as if he had seen a mouse or something nearly as dastardly. Madison had made sure to put emphasis on the name. "Why, I thought all the Walkers were extinct," he shrugged quite suddenly, his voice rather dull. "Well, you are looking at one, my lord," Madison stressed. "Now place him somewhere. The Empire does not require any more lords, nor does it need any princes," he said, rubbing his chin. "You will do something nice for Theo. His heritage and high blood demand it," Madison said through her teeth, becoming annoyed. "Do you forget that he is a direct relation of Queen Isis?" "How could one forget Queen Isis? I did not know her personally, but stories of her great reign echo across this fair empire," he said with modesty. "I shall have to review a few things and get back to you, Your Grace. Right now, I have nothing." "That will have to suffice," the Duchess answered. "Do not make me go see Lord Tetsuo." Lord Isaac shrunk back once again, gripping his staff. "No, you shall not have to go and see him." "Good," Madison smiled. "I shall see you later." It was not until after school on Friday that I received much news from Lord Isaac. In the meantime, the Duchess was showing me the ins and outs of the kingdom. There were countless new lords and ladies, many who were simply there for show. Madison was the only real noble with any land value. Everyone else had nothing but titles. Madison told me that the menagerie of aristocracy was all about splendor rather than true power. The emperor was a lover of pomp and circumstance, and enjoyed meaningless displays of opulence. It was really like he had a prized collection of tropical birds trapped in a gilded golden cage. "I have done my best to retain my position and maintain my lands," Madison told me. "Sunset must endure, for its history is rich." Despite the simply Asian appearance and demeanor of our emperor, many of the soldiers and guards retained their Roman-esque outfits. They wore plastic breastplates and carried plastic swords. A few carried cap guns, but those were usually restricted. "The Emperor has unionized the military as well, organizing it further," Madison explained. "The armed forces used to be called simply the Army, but now it comprises kids who are called into battle to fight. Guards are a different caste and work exclusively for lords and the Emperor. The royal city has its own police force now. You will notice the kids who wear long coats and police caps." "Do you have any guards?" I asked. The Duchess shook her head and crossed her arms. "Yes and no. My estate is, unfortunately, destitute. I cannot afford the funds to hire guards. Therefore, farmers from the fields simply assume the guise of a guard when I travel to the city." "How unfortunate," I murmured. "Why is your estate so poor? I thought Sunset was rich and wealthy with farmland and such." We were walking now towards the royal city. Madison wanted to check in on Lord Isaac. Being a Friday afternoon, the meadow was bursting with life. Children were prancing and marching here and there, going about their normal business. "Sunset is rich, yes, in farmland, but not in wealth," she told me. "The entirety of its wealth is in the land. This industry is not profitable in its current state. The Emperor has taxes too high and manipulates the agriculture in his favor." I nodded and we walked in silence. Once we had reached the asphalt path, Nova was standing astutely. She smiled gently and kept her arms behind her back. "Hello, Your Grace," she bowed. "Afternoon, Nova. So glad you could meet us here," the Duchess smiled. "Theo, you already know Nova. She is my royal attendant." "How interesting," I remarked. "Hopefully I am able to achieve such a position." A position such as that would be below you, my friend, the Duchess replied. We cannot say for certain what Lord Isaac has in store for you. The three of us walked slowly across the green, passing through the busy playground. The ministry was abuzz with activity, but we strolled by without much as a look. We came upon the rock-climbing wall, which was also busy. It appeared that soldiers were doing some sort of training, while one, who appeared to look like a commander, stood at the bottom shouting orders. Afternoon, Lord Tetsuo, Madison said warmly. So nice to see you. The boy turned around and gestured a short bow from his waist. So, was this the famous lord of the royal city I had heard so much about? This Tetsuo looked so common. He was dressed simply in a graphic tee and jeans, no royal cape or crown. He did not even carry a scepter or a staff. There was, however, a long gilded saber dangling from his waist. He had jet-black hair and calm, reassuring hazel eyes. Why, Duchess Madison, a pleasure, he replied simply. We are doing an exercise, you see. The lord is also the chief of police, young Theo, Madison told me. Who might you be? The lord inquired. I am Theo, Theodore Walker. Tetsuo's almond-shaped eyes grew wide with surprise, but a smile crossed his face. Another Walker has come to grace our meadow. This will prove to be interesting. We still teach our soldiers some of Abigail's war tactics. We are on our way to see Lord Isaac, Madison told him, placing her hands at center like a royal. Best of luck to you, Tetsuo replied, waving them off. He turned back to his police drills. I could not help but notice his gilded saber dangle effortlessly. It was almost as if he did not know it was there. That concludes the first chapter of the Tale of the Cloverleaf Lord. Theo has stepped into a magical world so unlike the one Jessica left behind. Join me next week when we tackle Chapter 2 entitled Welcome Home. Thanks for listening and have a great week. Dragon Boats by Fass is the music used during this novel on the podcast. Find us online on Facebook and Instagram by searching @Everglade Chronicles. You can find all 3 of the Everglade Chronicles novels exclusively on Amazon. Thank you kindly for your support.